So you've given us an idea of the background to the study, and I wonder if we're going to go on to talk about the design of the study, the methods, the data you collected. But I wonder if you could start by just very quickly giving us an overview of the design of the study.
Yeah. Um, so I went for a case study approach where you look at each part in this case individual people. The case is an individual person. So each of the four individual participants, and there were two residents and two members of the care team. Each one is treated as a separate case, and then the data collected for each case are analysed separately, and each is written up as a separate report, and you can then look across the reports, the four separate reports in this case, and draw out themes and lessons from those. And it seemed the best way to go because the participants are all so different. So we had care member of care, the care team was 20 mid-20s, one who was mid-30s. The residents were mid-70s and 97. So, and they had very, very different problems and things to deal with. So, different issues, different concerns. So, there was no way that you could generalise across them or try and gather data that you could think about sensibly across all the different cases. Um, so, yeah, that was it really. It was a bit garbled, but I
Okay.
hope that made some sense.
No, that's very, very clear. And in research, you always have to think about matters of informing participants and gaining consent.
Mhm.
How did you go about that in this particular instance?
Yeah, when you're dealing with vulnerable people, and certainly the residents in this case were vulnerable, um, then it has to be done with a great deal of care. It's always something that has to be done with care, but it's particularly difficult, I think, in these circumstances. So, I mean, the initial phase was just like it might be in any research study. So, typically, a researcher will prepare information sheets or information in some form that can be delivered orally or on paper, um, or both, as it was in this case, um, and consent forms. And these forms are typically ones where people say that they've understood what the studies are all about, and um, that they understand that they're not obliged to take part, and that they can drop out at any point, and it's no one's going to mind without any problem. And then typically they will sign, and to say that they've had necessary information, they consent. Um, so those were prepared, information sheets and consent forms, and the home held regular meetings for staff, separate ones for residents, and a separate meeting for visitors. So I talked to all the three groups separately in their meetings and told them about the study and handed out copies of the information sheets, so that they could read them, think about them, take them away, talk about them with other people. Um, and then I had a sort of time to think about it, and if they wanted to, they'd let me know that they wanted to take part. Um, and so the information was available in writing, and it was given also orally. Um, and I found people, I had staff and residents volunteer during the meetings, and as I say, then there was a kind of cooling off period and a chance for them to talk to family and friends and show them information sheet and stuff. And that was all fine. But when it comes to working with people with dementia, obviously they can say that they're happy to be involved one day, and then the next day they don't remember anything about the conversation. Um, so what that meant was that I had to be very cautious and um, very sensitive, and sort of it was a process of ongoing consent. So every time that I approached the individual resident, I'd start from scratch and say, "Oh, I'm Charlotte, and my mum's in the home here, and Hazel's sitting over there, whatever," and just basically explain what I was doing and ask their permission, and ask them if they were okay for me to work with them, and the first couple of times that, you take a few moments maybe, but then very quickly they both knew me, and even if they couldn't remember the detail of what we'd done together, they knew they enjoyed it and they were happy to work with me, and it became much easier, much less laborious. But it was a very much a question of ongoing consent, as all Alexander teachers are used to anyway, in terms of putting hands on. You're forever sort of saying, is it okay
Mm.
if I do this? Is it okay if I do that? It's like that, only writ large, I suppose. Yeah. Um, is that okay?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very helpful. So I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about the tools or the methods you use to collect data, and what kind of data did you collect?
Okay. So I used some things were common to all. So I used video on my phone. I took little bits of footage or short bit of film of participants before the Alexander lessons, sitting and standing and taking a few steps, and a short bit of footage at the end as well, so they could sort of see the difference between how they were moving at the start and the end of the pilot project. I took field notes, as researchers do, so before, during, no, not during, but after a lesson, I'd sort of sit somewhere and note down things that I'd observed, things that had been said, and whatnot. Um, so that was with both residents and care staff. With the carers, in addition, I did interviews with them at the start, so asking them, what the issues were that they thought the Alexander technique might be able to help with, um, what it was like working in the home, what their feelings about work there, the kind of things they were doing. And then afterwards, they had a follow-up interview, changes they'd observed, things to do with their home and work life, how that anything that they thought the Alexander technique might have helped with or changed in any way, um, and their views on whether they thought the Alexander technique might be helpful for other members of the community there in the care home. Um, so they did interviews. They also had questionnaires, and I used a questionnaire that I really like called MyMop, Measure Yourself Medical Outcomes Profile, which is available on the internet. I'll put a link in one of the later videos. Um, but basically, the nice thing about MyMop is it allows the individual participant to choose what is measured over time, um, measured in terms of, a scale of 1 to 6, where they sit on that scale of how good it is or how bad it is. So the individual participant is able to choose what symptoms they want to be looked at. So it's not the researcher imposing symptoms, but they choose their own. And also there's an opportunity for them to say talk about something that they part of their daily life. So one of them, for example, was interested in horse riding, and they wanted to know how the Alexander technique would help with that. Another one had really bad hip pain and wanted to know whether the Alexander technique would help with walking the dog, make it less painful. So there was other things apart from medical stuff. So that I used MyMop kind of at weekly intervals, so you could track change over time in these various symptoms and bits of aspects of daily life. And then there were a number of other objective data like height and weight. Yeah. So those were the data that were collected.
So quite a range
Yes.
of different kinds of data,
Mm.
which I guess is often the case with a case study approach,
Yeah.
because it gives you a richness of data for
Yeah.
each individual person. Just briefly, were there any particular challenges, obstacles, nice surprises that came up
Yeah, I think.
as you were getting started?
Yeah, I think a nice surprise what it was that it was relatively easy to recruit participants, which is not always the case. People were quite keen. I think they knew me, they saw me every day hanging about the home, and it seemed that side of it was quite easy. And challenges, I think perhaps the hardest thing, and it's always the case when you're trying to commit to writing sort of a description of what the Alexander technique is and does. So doing the information sheet about the study was hard, because you have to say a little bit about what the Alexander technique is and what it might help with, and getting all that down and stuff about data, how it will be stored, and what you'd like the participants to do if they take part, and all that kind of stuff. Getting all that down on paper in a way that's clear for people with a range of, you know, reading abilities and, you know, first languages or whatever, you know. So you've got to get it down nice and clearly and succinctly. That's quite a lot. That was for me the biggest challenge is it was getting it down on paper in that kind of way, accessible way. But yeah, that was I did
That's
it. I
great. Okay, that's lovely. So that gives us an idea of a bit more of how the study's beginning to come together. And next we'll hear a bit about the data you collected and what you found.
Yeah,
Thank you.